Hey, what's up there, YouTubers? Adjumants and a job come to you guys here today with another deck tech. So today we're taking a look at a standard build, and it is 5-color control. Now, this is a deck that I'm using for the kind of like mid-season for the Gatecrash season of Standard, and this is a deck that myself and my buddy Dan Zeiler, we're both using this deck for competitive play, and it's been working out pretty well. Both of our lists are pretty much exactly the same, except they kind of deviate a little bit whenever it comes to the sideboard strategies and what we like to side in for different matchups. Both of us have like appropriate things, but we just kind of like to take different approaches to things. Now, the deck functions pretty much like Bant Control, only with the addition of the other two colors that we have in order to run other various spells. So we are going to take a look at this deck, but before we get to that, if you guys have any suggestions for decks that you would like to see, please leave them down in the comments below, and I'll take them into consideration for future deck techs. So the first thing that we are taking a look at here is the land base of the deck. So first off, we have our shock lands being 4 Hallowed Fountains. We also have a playset of Temple Gardens, so another 4. We have 1 Overgrown Tomb, 1 single Stomping Ground, and we do have Farseek to be able to fetch them, and 2 Steam Vents. Then we have our other dual lands, being 3 Sunpetal Groves, 3 Hinterland Harbor, 2 Glacial Fortress, 2 Rootbound Crag, 1 Woodland Cemetery, and then 1 single isolated chapel. So that's the land base that we have. It's really particular for how we wanted to ultimately have this working out. We're both using the same land base for the deck, and it ends up working out well. We're also running Chromatic Lantern in the build, so even if we don't get the Lantern, or it ends up that we get the Lantern a little bit later than we want it, the land base will still end up working for us in any fashion that we kind of need to have it, and in the intensities that we needed for the different colors of spells that we're actually casting. So now let's take a look at everything that we have in the main board of the build aside from the lands. So first off, we're starting off with our creatures. We have Centaur Healers. So I'm running 2 Centaur Healers in the main board. 3/3 for 3, enters the battlefield and we gain 3 life. Pretty basic as far as Bant lists go. Most of them are going to be running something like Centaur Healer either on the main board and the sideboard, sometimes maybe not even at all, but I like it in the main board up against aggro. I'm also running Huntmaster of the Fells, and I have my my mark cards in here instead of the actual card. Whenever I'm actually playing, I have the copies in my deck box that I use whenever I'm playing them. But for Huntmaster of the Fells, 2/2 for 4, enters the battlefield, we gain 2 life, and we get a 2/2. Flip side, he's a 4/4, deals 2 damage to the creature and to a player. So ultimately, Huntmaster of the Fells is another card that lets us gain back life. He gives us another potential blocker or attacker. More times than not, he's going to be like a blocker himself and the token. If he flips, he is somewhat sizable. He's a 4/4, and he deals a little bit of damage. But ultimately, Huntmaster is pretty good to kind of stay in tempo with aggro. Thragtusk, another card that you guys would imagine would be in the list here. So playset of Thragtusk, he is another card that keeps us up to tempo with other aggro-based decks. We gain 5 life off of him whenever he enters the battlefield. We get a 3/3 whenever he leaves the battlefield, but on his own he's a 5/3 for 5. We are also running some singletons in here, so I have a singleton Sigarda, Host of Herons. So 5/5 for 5, flying hexproof, and spells and abilities your opponents control can't cause you to sacrifice permanents. Sigarda is a kind of awkward card for a lot of different decks, mainly Jund midrange. They have a kind of tough time trying to get around Sigarda aside from like Bonfire of the Damned, which not all the lists are running. So Sigarda is kind of awkward for them because it makes Liliana of the Veil essentially null and void as far as sack abilities go. And ultimately, they don't really have a lot of ways to actually get rid of Sigarda, so it's a perfect card to kind of have in there up against the Jund mid-range decks. But On its own, Flying Hexproof is pretty good. It can bash in there for some pretty decent damage. Also, another singleton is Armada Wurm for us here. So 5/5/4/6 with Trample. And whenever it enters the battlefield, we get a green 5/5 Worm with Trample as well. So ultimately, we end up having some pretty nice creatures for that 6 mana that we're actually putting in to cast the spell. And Armada Wurm's actually pretty good. The only kind of like downside to it is coming up against like Boros Reckoners and stuff like that, where you don't really want to be blocking because then you're like taking more life. You're like taking 5 life off of it. But ultimately, having Armada Wurm against like everything except Boros Reckoner, it's really good just because it's a really big, bulky dude that's just going to sit on the board, and it's not going to allow smaller things to get past and swing through as far as aggro goes. We also have Drogskol Reaver, which is a 3/5/4/7, 5 generic, 1 white and 1 blue. And it has Flying Double Strike, Lifelink, and whenever you gain life, draw a card. So we're running 2 Drogskol Reaver in the build, and Drogskol Reaver is awesome. He was really awesome back before Return to Ravnica was out because you could play Pristine Talisman and be able to draw extra cards every turn. But Drogskol Reaver is still pretty powerful in this deck, especially off of like Thragtusk, Huntmaster of the Fellows, and Centaur Healer, where we can draw off of gaining life off of those cards. But as it is, Flying Double Strike and Lifelink is pretty good for a 7-drop creature that we have, and ultimately it can deal some pretty decent damage. It can be a pretty decent blocker as well. But being able to draw every time we gain life is the perfect reason to have it in here. Then we're moving on to our Planeswalkers. So we have 3 Jace Architect of Thought. Jace ultimately is going to be used for his +1 and his -2. The +1 is going to be used to kind of thwart any aggro-based decks. It's not really going to do a whole lot against them, but it is going to kind of slow them down a little bit and at least make any blows that they're trying to make on Jace or on you a little bit smaller. The -2 is going to let us dig. It's a mini factor fiction of 3 cards, but instead of going to the graveyard, they're going to the bottom of our library. So Jace is pretty good as far as being able to get card advantage and being able to dig a little bit and get answers that you really need. There's really not very many downsides to the -2. You're always going to kind of get something that you want, and if you're not getting anything that you want at all, you're at least digging 2 things that you want to get. Then we have Garruk Primal Hunter, so running 2 Garruk Primal Hunter in the build. 3 loyalty, 5 cost, +1 gives us 3 3s, -3 lets us draw cards equal to the greatest power amongst creatures we control, which oftentimes is going to be a sizable bit. Off of like Thragtusk, it'll be 5, Sigarda 5 as well, Armada Wurm 5. I don't very often play it off of like something like Huntmaster of the Fells, but if I really need to, I'm going to be going off of that. But as it is, he makes 3 3s on his own, so worst case scenario, you could draw 3 off of just the 3/3 that you have on the board from Garruk Primal Hunter. But Primal Hunter is really strong in the build. He's probably one of my favorite Planeswalkers, and he's really powerful in the meta still. Then we're moving on to our X spells. So we have Sphinx's Revelation. So we're running 3 Sphinx's Revelation in the build. You gain X amount of life and draw X amount of cards for X, 1 blue and 1 white and double blue. So Sphinx's Revelation allows us to gain back life up against aggro builds. It lets us dig into things that we need, whether it's board wipes, dropping another fatty like Thragtusk, or Planeswalker like Garruk Primal Hunter, or even like Drogskol Reaver. But ultimately Sphinx's Revelation is really awesome. Against the control matchup, control is really inclined to counter the Sphinx's Revelation. So if we have like Sphinx's Revelation and Rakdos' Return, which we're getting to now, if we play our Sphinx's Revelation for X, they counter it and don't leave any mana open to counter another spell, we can hit them for just enough with the Rakdos' Return to make them discard their hand. So that's the nice thing that I like about Rakdos' Return and Sphinx's Revelation, is that they're going to be banking off of getting rid of your Sphinx's Revelation more than they're going to be expecting you to play something like Rakdos' Return the turn after. So we have 2 Rakdos' Return in the build. It's good up against any slower decks, mainly Control. Control is the biggest reason that you want to have this card in here. Against the aggro matchups, you end up siding it out just because it doesn't net you very much advantage, and it's not going to be dealing with the board state if your opponent does have creatures out there. But up against like the mid-range, the slow mid-range decks, the control builds, Rakdos' Return is what you want to have in here to be able to get rid of their resources. Moving on from there, we have Farseek. So Farseek is a playset for us here. Farseek lets us search for a Plains, Island, Swamp, or Mountain card, which is going to be one of our shocklands that we want to use. So it's either going to let us search for our Hallowed Fountain, Temple Garden, Overgrown Tomb, Stomping Ground, or Steam Vents, depending on what we actually need out to be on the board. So playset of Farseek, optimally played like turn 2. Lets us shuffle our deck as well off of Jace, Architect of Thought, and his -2 mini Factor Fiction ability. So ultimately it kind of lets us have an advantage of, alright, well, I had good things that went to the bottom of my deck that I couldn't get because I wanted other things. Now I can kind of reset, reshuffle, and work my way to possibly getting them again, or something like that. Farseek is a good way to shuffle, but ultimately playing it early game lets us ramp and fix. We also have Chromatic Lantern, like I mentioned earlier in the video. So Chromatic Lantern is a playset for us, 3 mana card, and it lets our lands tap for any 1 mana of color to our mana pool, and the Chromatic Lantern itself taps for any 1 color of mana to our mana pool. And then we have our board wipes here. So we have 3 Supreme Verdict, which can't be countered and destroys all creatures for 4, and 1 Merciless Eviction. So the Merciless Eviction is just a singleton in here, and I also have 1 more Supreme Verdict in the sideboard, but Merciless Eviction was something that I liked using up against like the Jund midrange builds, because that's kind of like an annoying matchup that we have. Jund midrange is very powerful, so up against that type of a build, we have the ability to exile their Planeswalkers if they're able to play something like Garruk Primal Hunter before us, and we don't want to trade and play our Primal Hunter to get rid of theirs. We're able to get rid of Planeswalkers if we need to, especially if they have like Liliana of the Veil on top of that. If they have both of their Planeswalkers against like us where we don't have any, we're able to just wipe out all their Planeswalkers, but at the same time we're able to use it as a board wipe as well that exiles creatures. So it was kind of like a more optimal means to Terminus, where Terminus is better to play up against aggro variants, but we already have a pretty decent hold up against aggro variants. I think whenever it comes down to things, that decks like Jund midrange are a little bit more annoying, so we want to have different things that we can kind of combat them even in game 1 and have a still pretty strong upper hand. So that's the main deck that we have for this build. Now let's take a look at what we have in the sideboard and everything that we're using in there. So for our sideboard, we kind of have some unique things here. The first card being Nicol Bolas Planeswalker. Now I like using this guy up against the control variants and anything that's like really, really slow tempoed. Up against anything that's kind of mid to fast paced, you're not really going to get a whole lot of advantage out of him, just because he's a really late game drop, and you don't want to be getting him in like your opening hand and just have him instead of something else that could be potentially better. But against the slow matchups like Control, like Esper Control, Nicol Bolas ends up being really good. +3 lets us destroy non-creature permanents, -2 lets us gain control of creatures, which isn't really as relevant against the Esper Control matchups, but it lets us blow up non-creature permanents, which are lands, so we can get rid of their Nephalia Drown Yards, which is a fairly big thing. So Nicol Bolas Planeswalker is awesome for that. And whenever we get to the ultimate, we can just blow stuff up. We have them deal 7 damage to target player. They have to discard 7 cards and sacrifice 7 permanents. So ultimately, Nicol Bolas Planeswalker is really awesome for that. I like using him as a singleton up against the control matchups. I'm also running Assemble the Legion, which is pretty much just for the Jund midrange matchups. I also sided in against some control variants as well. However, it's not like all the time, but it's a unique card, and it's definitely something that has grown on me, and I really like using in the sideboard for 5-color control. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a muster counter on it, and then you put a 1/1 onto the battlefield for each muster counter that is on Assemble the Legion, and those creatures have haste. So each turn you're going to be getting more tokens out of it. I like it up against the Jund midrange decks because they don't really have a way of dealing with it. It's an easy way to kind of combat when your opponent plays something like Garruk Primal Hunter and you are just kind of pinned with, all right, well, I need to start blocking their beasts and maybe even any other creatures that they're producing each and every turn. So we have that nice advantage of being able to create more and more creatures each turn, and if they get bonfired, it doesn't matter because we still get to make more tokens next turn, and it also offers a strategy to be able to swing alpha and just beat down our opponent because they do have haste. So when Assembled Legions, pretty much for the Gen mid-range matchup, but also for some control variants as well. You run into the possibility of them using like Oblivion Ring and Detention Sphere, but even still, they're just wasting that on Assemble a Legion, where we still have plenty of other threats that we could be using. We also have Negate in the sideboard, so Negate is a 2-of being able to counter non-creature spells. So in builds that are running a lot of non-creature things, mid-range decks, and the control variants are pretty much where we are going to be using this. Also, the flash variants as well are something that you want to be siding in negates for. We're also using Slaughter Games. So Slaughter Games is a 3-of, can't be countered, and it's essentially Memoricide, where we get to name a non-land card, search target opponent's graveyard, hand, and library for any number of cards with that name and exile them. So Slaughter Games is our means of being able to play it up against control variants and stuff that is going to be trying to combo off, especially like the Reanimator style decks that are running like Angel of Glory's Rise and trying to combo off and beat us down on the turn that they reanimate everything. If we go Slaughter Games and name something like Angel of Glory's Rise, then essentially they don't really have a way of being able to beat us. Their combo is just pretty much falling apart. Against control, you're able to name bombs and threats that your opponents have. Obviously, you can't name Nephalia Drownyard, which is kind of like the downfall to playing up against like the Esper control matchup. However, there's still plenty of things that you name with Slaughter Games to just kind of keep you in the game and have less things that your opponent can use against you. So I like Slaughter Games as a 3-of in there. I also have 2 Jace Memory Adept for the slower matchups as well. Being able to mill out your opponent with the 0 ability is a win condition on its own. So 2 Jace over to Jace Architect of Thought. We also have Rest in Peace. So this is again for the Reanimator style decks. Anything that's relying very heavily on the graveyards. Not so much zombies, just because they have the means of being able to get rid of Rest in Peace. However, I haven't really had to worry very much about zombies lately, so it's pretty safe not really having to rely on like siding in Rest in Peace or having sideboard slots dedicated to zombies. But Rest in Peace is mainly for the Reanimator style decks, so it's just another means of being able to drop it, get rid of their graveyard, and not let them combo off with anything. But Slaughter Games and Rest in Peace as a combo are really good for the Reanimator style combo decks. We also have 2 Detention Sphere to be able to get rid of things. Non-Detention Sphere, non-land permanents are what we're going to try to hit into. And then we have 1 Singleton Supreme Verdict for the aggro matchup, so we can side that in and be able to board wipe more effectively. So that is the 5-color control deck that I have for you guys here today. The entire deck list is down below where you guys can use that as a reference, as well as a playlist to all the previous decks that I've covered on the channel. If you guys enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, favorite, and subscribe for more Magic the Gathering content. But until next time, guys, have yourselves a wonderful, fun-filled Magic the Gathering day.